The story begins in a quiet place, a wooded area just outside a small town. It wasn't remote and it wasn't hidden. People walked through it regularly. There was nothing about the area that suggested something was wrong. No warnings, no history, no reason to be cautious. That makes what happened there unsettling. Because the discovery didn't happen during an investigation, it didn't follow a crime. It happened by accident. And once it was found, it became clear that whatever had taken place hadn't been recent or simple. From that point on, the place was no longer just a wooded area, it became the center of a question that still hasn't been answered. The discovery was made in April of 1943. At the time, Britain was in the middle of the Second World War. Hagley Wood was a familiar place to local residents. It wasn't isolated and it wasn't restricted. One afternoon, four local boys entered the woods. They were not searching for anything unusual. They were simply exploring. While climbing trees, one of the boys noticed something inside the trunk of a wych elm. At first, it didn't look like what it was. But as they looked closer, it became clear that human remains were inside the tree. Authorities were notified and an investigation began. The remains belonged to a woman. Examination suggested she had been placed inside the tree deliberately. The position of the body indicated that this was not an accident. Based on available evidence, investigators believed the woman had been dead for some time before she was found. However, beyond these basic conclusions, there were very few clear answers. No immediate identification could be made, and no obvious explanation presented itself. Once the initial investigation concluded, attention turned to a single question. Who was the woman found inside the tree? Despite efforts to identify her, no records provided an answer. Missing person reports were checked. None matched. There were no documents, no personal items, no clear background to work from. No one came forward to claim her. At the time, this was unusual. Even during war times, most people were known to someone. But in this case, the woman seemed to exist without a history. For months, the investigation stalled. There was no identity to pursue, no clear direction to follow. Then, sometime later, something unexpected appeared. A message began to surface, written on walls near the area. It wasn't signed, it wasn't explained. It asked a single question: who put Bella in the wych elm? The message raised an obvious question. How did someone know enough to write it? At the time, details of the case were not widely public. Yet the message suggested familiarity, not just with the discovery, but the woman herself. Investigators revisited the evidence. They examined timelines. They examined circumstances. But the answers did not align. Estimates of when the woman died varied. Some details suggested she had been placed in the tree months earlier. Other details did not support that conclusion. There was no clear explanation for how her body could have been positioned inside the tree. The space was narrow. The placement appeared deliberate, but no method could be confirmed. As more questions surfaced, fewer answers followed. Eventually, the investigation reached a familiar point. There was evidence, but not enough clarity to move forward. And several theories were put forward. None of them could be confirmed. One theory suggested that the woman was a local resident, someone who disappeared, went unnoticed during a period when records were incomplete. Supporters of this idea pointed to the war and the disruption it caused. Another theory focused on espionage. The secrecy of the case, combined with the time period, led some to believe the woman may have been involved in the intelligence work. However, no definitive evidence supported this explanation. A third theory centered on local knowledge. It suggested that someone nearby knew who the woman was and chose not to speak. This theory relied heavily on assumption rather than proof. In the end, each theory answered some questions and left others unresolved. Decades have passed since the woman was found in Hagley Wood. Her identity was never confirmed. No definitive explanation was ever accepted. The message that appeared on the walls eventually faded, but the question it asked did not. The tree still stands, the place still exists, and whatever happened there required someone to act and then remain silent. That silence is what keeps this case unresolved, not because there were no theories, but because there were no answers that could survive scrutiny.